Back to our top story this morning. Boris Johnson is expected to announce plans to ease the lockdown rules for 6 days over Christmas. So how will he persuade us to stick to the rules that will remain in place? Well, Paul Dolan is a Professor of Behavioural Science at the London School of Economics. Professor, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Firstly, how does the government persuade almost 70 million people to do the right thing?
Hello, thank you for having me on. Well, first of all, I think they need to be very clear. I think there's lots of uncertainties about what will happen next. So the human condition doesn't like uncertainty, so we should resolve that and be very clear about what happens next. I think also it's about trust, and we've heard a lot over the last few months about trust in politicians, government, and so on. But there's also an extent to which we need to trust people much more, right? I think we've realised, everybody knows that this is a deadly, COVID-19 virus, and we need to change our behaviour. And so I think a little bit of responsibility being passed back to people. I think, we do understand a lot more than I think we're given credit for. So I think clarity of what we're expected to do and allowing us to kind of work that out to some degree for ourselves.
So is there anything that we've learned from the last lockdown in terms of people's behaviour?
Well, I think people were incredibly compliant, weren't they, first time around? I think I just saw a survey yesterday saying that about 1 in 4 people intend to break the current lockdown Christmas rules, whatever they might be. And I think that's representative of a general change in people's mood and attitude. Partly trust has been to some extent lost, but also I think because people are kind of working out to some large extent for themselves what to do. I think it's like a social contract, right? So we have trust in the government to be able to provide us with the right regulations and rules for us to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19. And at the same time, they trust us to act sensibly in that context. And I think there hasn't been, I would argue probably not so much of that two-way street. I think, I was concerned earlier this week, for example, when it's kind of like if we let you out for 1 day, you're then going to have to stay in for 5 days. It's a bit like how parents treat children. If you go out at night, then you're going to have to be staying at home for the next days or two. It kind of feels like we've sort of broken that social contract a bit.
Yeah, and on that last point of yours, how important is messaging right now? There have been questions about the effectiveness of the government's messaging in England, at least.
Yeah, well, messages, this is not rocket science. Messages need to be very clear and intelligible, and obviously therefore make sense to people. And I think this is the problem when we get into micromanaging. So we've had this last lockdown where, for example, kids sport, amateur sport outdoors, they can't play that. And it's kind of people understanding, well, why can't we do that? And yet we can do other things indoors. And as we've understood more about the transmission risks, I think we've had opportunities that have been missed, but it's not too late to tell people what those risks are, where they really do face the most, chance of catching the virus and experiencing the most adverse outcomes.
We've also reached a point where we are hearing positive news about the arrival of a vaccine. The Health Secretary said last week that he hopes the rollout will begin from December, and we'll see it go into next year. How important is messaging when it comes to persuading people about taking the vaccine? Because there are many people who are sceptical about whether it's the right thing to do, and there is a lot of misinformation out there.
There really is. There's a literature that talks to the 3 C's about vaccination: convenience, complacency, and confidence. And so convenience is the first one. So basically, can we access it? Is it easy to get vaccinated? One of the very simple lessons of changing behavior is, if you want someone to do something, make it easy. So we obviously have to have access to it, information about how to get there, and so on. Complacency is the second C. When the benefits are seen as being low, then people are less likely to get vaccinated. Now, I think one of the things, of course, that we've seen a considerable increase in fear over the past few months. And so maybe the complacency might be less. And then the third C is confidence. But this is actually where perhaps the fear might play in a negative way, because we need to be confident in the system, we need to be confident in the vaccine, we need to be confident in the government, we need to have trust. And This is the third C that I think is going to be the hardest one for us to kind of crack, in a sense, if we really want to get people taking the vaccine. And different messages are going to be needed for the three Cs, basically.
Professor Paul Dolan, Professor in Behavioural Science at the London School of Economics. Fascinating talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.